Johnny Carson had interviewed thousands of children over 30 years, but none of them started like this. The little girl said one sentence and Johnny's face completely changed. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B at NBC in Burbank. March 1985. Another Thursday night taping. The familiar rhythm of late-night television, monologue, desk piece, commercial break, first guest. Johnny was in his usual form. Sharp. Quick. The monologue had landed perfectly. Ed McMahon's laugh booming at all the right moments. Doc Severinsen and the band playing smooth transitions. 300 studio audience members settling in for exactly what they expected. America's most beloved late-night host making them laugh before bed. The first guest was unusual but not unprecedented. A 7-year-old girl named Sarah Mitchell from Omaha, Nebraska. She'd written a letter to the show 6 months earlier, not asking to be on television, but asking Johnny a question. The producers had been charmed by the letter's earnest simplicity, and invited her to ask the question in person. "Our next guest," Johnny said, reading from his blue cue card with that familiar twinkle in his eye, "is 7 years old, she's in 2nd grade, and she has a very important question for me. Please welcome Sarah Mitchell." The band played a cheerful intro. The curtain parted. And out walked the smallest guest Johnny Carson had ever had. Sarah Mitchell was tiny. Even for 7. She wore a simple blue dress that her mother had clearly chosen for the occasion, white shoes that clicked on the studio floor, and her dark hair was pulled back with a ribbon. She walked toward Johnny's desk with the careful, measured steps of a child who had been told exactly where to go and was determined not to mess it up. The audience gave her warm applause, that automatic affection adults show for brave children. Johnny stood up as she approached, which he always did for guests, but this time he had to crouch down slightly to shake her hand. "Well, hello there, Sarah," Johnny said, his voice automatically softening the way it did when he spoke to children. "How are you doing?" "I'm nervous," Sarah said into the microphone Johnny held toward her, her voice small but clear. The audience laughed, not at her, but with her. Her honesty was disarming. "That's okay," Johnny assured her. "I get nervous too sometimes. Do you want to sit down?" He guided her to the guest chair, the beige chair that had held thousands of celebrities, politicians, and entertainers. Sarah climbed up into it, and her feet dangled a good 6 inches off the floor. She looked impossibly small in that adult-sized furniture, her hands folded neatly in her lap the way she'd probably been taught. Johnny sat back down behind his desk, smiling at her with genuine warmth. "So Sarah, I understand you have a question for me?" "Yes," she said, nodding seriously. "Well, before you ask it, tell me a little about yourself. You're from Omaha?" "Yes. That's in Nebraska." "I know," Johnny said, his smile widening. "I'm actually from Nebraska too. Did you know that?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Really? Really? So we're practically neighbors. What's it like growing up in Omaha?" And for the next 2 minutes, Johnny Carson, master interviewer, king of late-night television, conducted a perfectly charming conversation with a 7-year-old about her 2nd-grade teacher, her dog named Biscuit, and whether she liked winter or summer better. The audience was eating it up. This was vintage Carson, taking something simple and finding the humanity in it, making a nervous child comfortable, creating a moment that felt spontaneous and real. Carson stopped mid-sentence. The entire studio froze. "So," Johnny said, settling back in his chair with that familiar lean, "I heard you have a question you wanted to ask me. What's the question, Sarah?" Sarah looked down at her hands, then back up at Johnny. She took a breath, the way children do before they say something they've been thinking about for a long time. "My daddy died last year," she said. The smile on Johnny's face didn't disappear, but something shifted. A small tightening around his eyes. A barely perceptible change that 30 years of performing couldn't quite hide. "I'm very sorry to hear that," Johnny said, his voice gentler now, the performer's tone replaced by something more genuine. "He watched your show every night. Sarah continued, her voice still small but steady, like she was determined to get through this. Every single night. Even when he was in the hospital. The nurses would let him stay up late to watch you. The studio had gone quiet. Not the expectant quiet of waiting for a punchline. The heavy quiet of 300 people suddenly aware they were witnessing something that wasn't supposed to happen on a comedy show. Johnny leaned forward slightly, his hands folded on his desk. That means a lot to me, Sarah. What was your daddy's name? Thomas Mitchell. Tommy. Everyone called him Tommy. Tommy, Johnny repeated, as if committing it to memory. And what was your question? Sarah looked directly at Johnny with the unblinking, unflinching honesty that only children possess, the kind that cuts through pretense and protocol and gets straight to the raw truth. My question is, she said, her voice wavering slightly but pushing through. If you made my daddy laugh every night, even when he was really sick, does that mean you're kind of like family? The silence that followed was absolute. Johnny Carson sat completely still behind his desk. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His eyes, those sharp, quick eyes that had conducted thousands of interviews with perfect control, began to glisten. Ed McMahon, sitting at his announcer's position, put his hand over his mouth. Doc Severinsen lowered his trumpet. The camera operators stopped adjusting their angles. The control room went silent. Because Johnny Carson, who never lost his composure, who always had a quip ready, who navigated every interview with effortless grace, had no words. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. To understand why Sarah Mitchell's question hit Johnny Carson so hard, you need to understand something about Johnny that most of America never saw. Johnny Carson was the most private public figure in America. He performed for millions every night, but he protected his personal life with fierce determination. He didn't do interviews about himself. He didn't open up about his childhood, his relationships, his fears. But there was one part of his life that haunted him, one wound that never quite healed. His relationship with his own father. Homer Carson had been a hard man. Emotionally distant. Critical. The kind of father who showed love through silence and expectations rather than words and affection. Johnny had spent his entire childhood trying to earn a laugh from a man who didn't know how to give one. When Johnny became successful, when he started doing magic shows as a teenager, when he got into radio, when he eventually landed The Tonight Show, he'd hoped his father would finally show pride. Finally show something that looked like approval. Homer Carson died in 1963, just 1 year after Johnny took over The Tonight Show. And in all that time, Johnny never got the words he'd been waiting for. Never got the, "I'm proud of you, son," that might have healed decades of distance. Johnny had built his career on making people laugh. Making them feel connected. Making them feel like he was their friend, visiting them in their living rooms every night at 11:30. He'd become a surrogate companion for millions of Americans, people who watched him through good times and bad, through personal crises and late-night loneliness. But he never quite made peace with the fact that he couldn't do that for his own father. And now, 30 years later, a 7-year-old girl was sitting in his guest chair asking if making her dying father laugh meant they were family. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Johnny stood up from behind his desk. Not the casual standing he did sometimes during interviews. This was different. Deliberate. He walked around the desk and crossed the small space to where Sarah sat in the oversized guest chair. He crouched down beside her, bringing himself to her eye level, and for a moment the cameras didn't matter, the audience didn't matter, the show didn't matter. "Sarah," Johnny said, his voice thick with emotion he wasn't even trying to hide. "Yes. If I made your daddy laugh when he was sick, if I got to be part of his nights, then yes, we're family. That's exactly what we are." Sarah's small face crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Really?" "Really," Johnny said, and reached out to take her small hand in both of his. "Your daddy and I, we were friends. I didn't know him, but I was there with him. Do you understand? Every night when he watched, I was there. He said you made the bad days better, Sarah whispered. Johnny's jaw clenched. He looked down for a moment, composing himself, then back at her. Sarah, I need to tell you something. Can I tell you something important? She nodded. My own daddy. Johnny paused, choosing his words carefully. My own daddy wasn't very good at telling me he loved me. And when he died, I never got to hear it. But you know what? What? Your daddy loved you so much that even when he was sick, he stayed up late to try to find reasons to smile. Because daddies want to be strong for their little girls. They want to be happy even when they're scared. And if I helped him do that, if I helped him be strong for you, then that's the most important thing I've ever done. The studio was crying. All of it. 300 audience members with tears streaming down their faces. Cameramen wiping their eyes while trying to keep their shots steady. Ed McMahon openly sobbing at his desk. Doc Severinsen had set down his trumpet and was wiping his face with a handkerchief. Johnny stood up and offered his hand to Sarah. Will you do something for me? Okay, she said, taking his hand and sliding down from the chair. Johnny led her back to his desk. He opened the top drawer, a drawer that held his blue cue cards, his pens, his cigarettes, the small personal items he kept close during tapings. He pulled out a single blue cue card. Blank. He picked up his pen and wrote something on it, his hand steady despite everything. Then he folded it carefully and handed it to Sarah. This is for you, he said. But I want you to promise me something. Don't open it tonight. Wait until you're home with your mom. And when you open it, I want you to read it out loud. Can you do that? Yes, Sarah said, holding the folded card like it was made of gold. Johnny crouched down one more time. Your daddy was lucky to have you. And I'm lucky I got to meet you. Thank you for coming on my show. Thank you for being my daddy's friend, Sarah said. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Johnny stood up and turned to face the audience. His eyes were red. His usual controlled demeanor completely abandoned. He looked directly into camera one. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice rough. I've been doing this show for 23 years. And I've had the incredible privilege of coming into your homes every night. But I don't think I've ever fully understood what that means until right now. He gestured to Sarah, who stood beside him holding her folded cue card. This little girl lost her father. And she came here tonight to ask me if making him laugh meant we were family. And I have to tell you, that's the most important question anyone has ever asked me on this show. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. We spend our lives trying to matter. Johnny continued. Trying to leave some kind of mark. Trying to be important. And I've been very fortunate. I've had success beyond anything I ever imagined. But Sarah just taught me something. He looked down at her, then back at the audience. The moments that matter most aren't the big ones. They're not the famous guests, or the viral jokes, or the ratings. The moments that matter are the quiet ones. The ones where maybe, just maybe, we help someone get through one more day. Where we give someone a reason to smile when smiling feels impossible. Where we become, in some small way, family to strangers who need us. He paused, wiping his eyes unabashedly. So thank you, Sarah, for reminding me why I do this. For letting me be your daddy's friend. And for being brave enough to come here and ask a question that I needed to answer. The standing ovation started slowly, one person, then 10, then the entire studio rising to their feet. The applause wasn't the excited, energetic applause of entertainment. It was the reverent, cathartic applause of people who had just witnessed something rare and real. Johnny picked Sarah up. This tiny 7-year-old who had just taught America's most famous host a lesson about what truly matters, and carried her off stage himself, breaking every protocol, every rule about how shows were supposed to end. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The show went to commercial. During the break, Johnny sat with Sarah and her mother backstage. He asked about Tommy Mitchell, what he did for a living, electrician, what he liked to do, fishing. What made him laugh the hardest, physical comedy, especially pratfalls. When the show came back from commercial, Johnny dedicated the rest of the episode to physical comedy sketches in Tommy Mitchell's honor. He took pratfalls himself, something he rarely did anymore. He made it messy and silly and exactly the kind of humor a father might have shared with his daughter. That night, back in their Omaha hotel room, Sarah opened the folded cue card with her mother beside her. In Johnny's distinctive handwriting it read, "Dear Sarah, your daddy taught you to be brave. Now I need you to teach me something. Never forget that the people we make laugh become our family. I won't forget your daddy. And I won't forget you. Love, Johnny." Sarah Mitchell kept that cue card for the rest of her life. When she got married, she carried it in her bouquet. When she had children of her own, she showed it to them and told them about the night she went on The Tonight Show and asked Johnny Carson a question. Johnny Carson never spoke publicly about that night again. But people who worked on the show said something changed after that. He became more present during tapings. More willing to let moments breathe. More interested in the human stories than the punchlines. The footage of Sarah's appearance aired exactly once, that night. Johnny requested it never be rerun, never be packaged into highlight reels. It was too personal, too raw. It belonged to Sarah and her father, not to television history. But everyone who was in that studio that night remembered it. They told their families. Their friends. The story spread in the way important stories do, not through media, but through people who witnessed something that mattered. When Johnny Carson died in 2005, Sarah Mitchell attended his memorial service. She was 27 years old. And in her purse, folded carefully, was a blue cue card that had traveled with her for 20 years. She never opened it in public again. But she knew every word by heart. Because some families aren't made by blood. They're made by late nights and laughter, and the unexpected ways we show up for each other in the dark.